Hi, I'm Shanika Center. I am the Virtual Content Specialist for Middle School Science for multilingual learners and English language learners. This is the third video for lessons of April 19th, the research stations. This video focuses on research stations 4 and 5. Again, this is a student-facing video. If you need the other research stations, I made videos for all of them previously. Hi, I'm Shanika Center. I am the Virtual Content Specialist for Middle School Science for multilingual learners and English language learners. Today we are going to finish up our research on stations 4 and 5. This research will be helpful for lesson 19 in unit 4, where your teacher is going to ask you to look at the impacts of environment and genetics on characteristics. For this station, we are going to be discussing a study done on twins. The first study is going to cover identical twins, and then the second study is going to cover identical and non-identical twins. Before we get started, let's review some vocabulary. Identical twins come from the same sperm and egg, which means they have the same exact DNA. This means that they often share many of the same characteristics, especially when they are young. In the study, they're going to talk about identical twins that were raised together or raised apart. Raised together means that the twins grew up in the same environment. They grew up in the same house and were raised by the same people. Identical twins that were raised apart grew up in different environments. So maybe one twin lived in a house in the suburbs, and the other twin lived in an apartment in the city. So twins that were raised apart grew up in different environments. As a reminder, identical twins have the same exact DNA. Let's look at this first part of Research Station 4. Follow along as I read. Twin studies. Twin studies are one of the best ways scientists can look at the effects of genetics and environment because it is easy to control either the genetics or the environment. Read about 2 important twin studies below. Study 1. In one of the first large twin studies, completed in 1990, researchers observed identical twins raised apart and identical twins raised together. This is some of the data they found. So we're looking at 2 traits, height and weight. For identical twins raised together, the height was 93% similar. The weight of identical twins raised together was 83% similar. For identical twins that were raised apart, 86% of them had similar heights. 73% of them had similar weights. For this next study, we're going to look at identical twins versus non-identical twins. Let's review some vocabulary. Again, identical twins have the same exact DNA. Non-identical twins, also called fraternal twins, do not have the same DNA. They come from completely separate sperm and egg combinations. This is why some twins can be boy and girl pairs. Fraternal or non-identical twins can also be boy and boy or girl and girl, but the twins won't look identical. Follow along as I read. Study number 2. In January 2016, Lorelei A. Mushi released an article about her study of identical twins and non-identical twins, each pair of twins raised together. In 32% of the total amount of twins, cancer was diagnosed in both twins. The table below shows the percent of identical twins that had the same cancer type and the non-identical twins that had the same cancer type. So out of all of the identical twins that she studied, 38% of the identical twins had the same cancer type. Only 26% of the non-identical twins had the same cancer type. Now that we have examined 2 different studies on twins, answer these questions. What does study 1 tell you about the influence of genetics and/or environment? You can use these sentence starters to help you. Question number 2. What does study 2 tell you about the influence of genetics and/or environment? And you can use these sentence starters to help you answer this question. Make sure you're answering this question in full sentences in your notes. In this research station, we're going to examine the impact that genetics and environmental factors have on obesity. Before we get started, let's look at some vocabulary. Obesity. Obesity is an excess of body fat on a human. Genes are segments of your DNA. Inherit means something that you get from your parents. In this case, we're talking about DNA. So the genes or the DNA that you inherit get from your parents. Follow along as I read. Having a healthy amount of body fat is very important for a person's overall health. Obesity is a condition that occurs when a person's body's fat levels enter an unhealthy high range. In a study done with mice, one group of researchers found that there are 244 genes that caused increased body weight and body fat when they altered them. In humans, scientists have so far identified about 253 genes that are associated with obesity. The second part of Research Station 5 talks about 2 concepts: physical activity and dietary restraint. Physical activity is the amount of exercise that someone does. Physical activity can be walking, running, playing a sport, or even doing yoga. When your body is moving, you are doing some sort of physical activity. Dietary restraint is how much food you are eating. If you have little dietary restraint, you look like Patrick over here, who's just inhaling tons of burgers. If you have high dietary restraint, you may have a lot of control over what you're eating. In the second part of the research, we're going to talk about having low dietary restraint. So think about people acting like Patrick. Follow along as I read. Another study found that body fat was often inherited from parents. This was the case 59% of the time for women and 63% of the time for men. Meanwhile, an article in Science states that low levels of physical activity and low levels of dietary restraint increase a person's risk for obesity. This is shown in the graph to the right. So this graph is showing us that when a person's physical activity is low and their dietary restraint is low, they have a high chance for obesity. If a person's physical activity is high and their dietary restraint is high, they have a low risk for obesity. Now that we have examined both parts of Research Station 5, answer these questions. What evidence is there that obesity is caused by genetic factors? You can use this sentence starter to help you. Question number 2. What evidence is there that obesity is caused by environmental factors? You can use this sentence starter to help you. Make sure you're answering these questions in full sentences in your notes.